Number 1. Marvin Gaye. He wasn't just a singer. He was a feeling, a velvet voice that taught a generation how to love, how to protest, and how to heal. What's going on? He gave us the anthem. But behind his soulful music, a private war was raging. The man who sang of mercy would receive none from the one man who should have loved him most. This is the story of a father's venomous jealousy and a son's desperate cry for help. We are uncovering the 10 most tragic cases of music legends betrayed and murdered by their own families. If you believe these stories must be told, subscribe to this channel right now. The stage was set in a house of horrors in Washington, D.C. Marvin Gaye Sr. wasn't just a preacher. He was a tyrant in God's clothing, a strict disciplinarian who enforced perfection with his fists, all while living a secret double life of cross-dressing and heavy drinking. He resented his son from the beginning. As young Marvin's star began to rise, his father's envy festered. His famous words to his son, "You will never amount to anything." But Marvin didn't just amount to something. He became a global icon. He added the to his name to escape his father's shadow, but he could never truly break free. By 1983, the superstar was spiraling. Despite the global high of sexual healing, he was in a personal hell of cocaine addiction, paranoia, and deep depression. In a fateful decision, he moved back into his parents' home in Los Angeles. The house became a pressure cooker. The old, frail father, still filled with rage, hated his famous son's presence. They fought constantly. Screams echoed where music should have lived. And then came the sickening irony. For Christmas, Marvin gave his father a gift. It was a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson pistol. He had unknowingly armed his own executioner. On April 1st, 1984, the day before Marvin's 45th birthday, a petty argument over a missing insurance letter ignited the final confrontation. Marvin's father was screaming at his mother. Marvin, from his bed, shouted for him to stop. When the shouting continued, Marvin confronted his father. A shove, a kick, a lifetime of abuse boiled over. His mother separated them. Marvin returned to his bedroom, thinking it was over. He sat on his bed, trying to cool down. But Marvin Gaye Sr. was not done. He walked down the hall. He entered his son's room, and without a word, he raised the gun his son had given him. He aimed at the chest of the Prince of Soul. He fired. The bullet tore through Marvin's heart. It was a fatal wound, but the father wasn't finished. He stepped closer to his dying, gasping son. He fired a second shot, point blank, into his shoulder. It was an execution. When police arrived, they found the legend dead on his bedroom floor. His father was sitting calmly on the porch. When asked if he loved his son, the old man coldly replied, "Let's say I didn't dislike him." The trial was a mockery. Pleading no contest to voluntary manslaughter, Marvin Gaye Sr. was given a suspended sentence and probation. He never spent a single day in prison for murdering one of the greatest musical minds in history. Marvin's last words were a haunting whisper to his brother, "I got what I wanted. I couldn't do it myself." This case leaves us with a chilling question. Was this the act of a man driven by mental illness? Or was it the final, calculated move of a jealous father who could not stand his son's light? Let me know your verdict in the comments. If this first chapter of our investigation into family betrayal shocked you, hit that like button. Share this video with a music lover. And make sure you subscribe. Part 2 reveals how a jazz trumpet genius was murdered in a blizzard by the woman who saved his life. Number 2. Lee Morgan. In the smoky, dimly lit jazz clubs of 1960s New York, his trumpet was a beacon of pure, unadulterated cool. He was a prodigy, a genius who played with a fire that left audiences spellbound. He had played with John Coltrane. His hit, The Sidewinder, set the world on fire. But the jazz world is a place where brilliance often dances with darkness. And Lee Morgan's life was a pendulum swinging between the two. His story isn't just a murder. It's a tragedy of heartbreaking ingratitude. A chilling reminder that the person who saves your life can also be the one who ends it. To understand Lee Morgan's death, you must first understand his darkest hour. By the late 1960s, the trumpet king had fallen for grace. Heroin had him in its grip. He was homeless, sleeping on streets, hawking his beloved trumpet for his next fix. The industry that once adored him had left him for dead. It was in this gutter that an angel found him. But this was no guardian angel. Her name was Helen Moore. Helen was tough, street smart, and she saw the broken man shivering in the cold. She didn't just give him a bed. She gave him a life. She nursed him through agonizing withdrawal. She fed him. She clothed him. She became his manager, his booker, his everything. She was his savior. Because of Helen, Lee Morgan staged one of the greatest comebacks in jazz history. He was clean. He was touring. He was reclaiming his throne. But as Lee's star rose again, so did his ego. He began to resent the woman who had seen him at his absolute lowest. He started an affair with a younger woman, Judith Johnson. The man who was saved from the slow death of heroin began to push his savior away with open disrespect. It was a betrayal of the deepest kind. On the night of February 19th, 1972, a monstrous blizzard was burying New York City. But inside a club called Slug Saloon, the air was hot with tension. Lee was on stage, his trumpet singing. Helen had come to the club, perhaps for one last conversation. But Lee was done with her. In between sets, a furious argument exploded. Lee, emboldened by his new success and his new mistress, physically threw Helen out of the club. He humiliated her in front of everyone. He told her to get out and never come back. It was the final, unforgivable insult. Helen stumbled out into the freezing, blinding snow. But she didn't go home. She sat in her car for a moment, the engine running, the heater blowing on a heart that had just turned to ice. And she made a decision that would silence a legend forever. She reached into her purse and pulled out a gun. She walked back into the club. The band was preparing for the next set. Lee Morgan was at the bar, laughing, ready to go back on stage. He looked up and saw Helen walking toward him. He never saw the gun. She didn't scream. She didn't yell. She simply raised the pistol and fired a single, devastating shot directly into his chest. The gunshot echoed through the club, louder than any trumpet blast. Lee stumbled and fell. And here is the most tragic, haunting twist of this entire story. The wound was serious, but doctors later said it might not have been fatal. But outside, the blizzard of the century raged. The snow was too deep. The ambulance was trapped, paralyzed by the storm. For a full, agonizing hour, Lee Morgan lay on the cold floor of the jazz club, bleeding to death. And the woman who had spent years saving his life, the woman who had brought him back from the brink, stood over him and watched the life she had restored slowly drain away. When she realized the enormity of what she had done, she began to scream, "I'm sorry. I am sorry." She had killed her own creation. Lee Morgan was pronounced dead at the scene. He was 33 years old. Helen was arrested, deemed mentally incompetent, and served a short sentence. She lived the rest of her life in obscurity, a ghost haunted by that night in the snow. This case forces us to confront a toxic question about dependency and gratitude. Helen gave him everything, and when he tried to leave, she took it all back. So I ask you, was this a crime of pure jealous rage? Or was it the desperate, final act of a woman who felt her entire identity and purpose being erased by the very man she built from the ground up? Number 3, Felix Pappalardi. He was the architect of the heavy metal sound, the man who brought the thunder, a classically trained genius whose fingerprints are all over the DNA of hard rock. He was the visionary producer behind Cream, earning him the title of the band's 4th member alongside Eric Clapton. He was the bassist and voice of Mountain, giving the world the earth-shaking anthem Mississippi Queen. But his immense musical intelligence could not save him from the toxic web he had woven in his own home. This is a story of artistic collaboration that curdled into a deadly obsession, a warning that the most dangerous person in a rock star's life is often the one sleeping beside them. The story of Felix Pappalardi is inextricably linked to one woman, his wife, Gail Collins. This wasn't a simple rock star and groupie tale. Gail was a formidable artist in her own right. She wrote the lyrics to Cream's hits like Strange Brew and designed Mountain's iconic psychedelic album covers. They were a New York power couple, partners in art, in business, in life. But inside their high-rise Manhattan apartment, the dynamic was far darker. Friends described Gail as intensely controlling, a woman who ruled over Felix with an iron will. Their relationship was a volatile cocktail of drugs, ego, and a turbulent open marriage. By 1983, that cocktail was about to explode. Felix had begun a serious affair with a younger woman. This wasn't a casual fling. He was planning to leave Gail. He was planning to break the partnership. For a woman like Gail Collins, who had built her entire identity on being the muse and mastermind behind a rock god, this was an unacceptable loss of power. The tension in their fifth-floor apartment reached its breaking point on April 17, 1983. Felix had returned home late. The arguments that had defined their recent years erupted into a final, fatal confrontation. But this time, words are not enough. In a twist of cruel, shocking irony that echoes through these stories, the weapon used to kill the music legend was a gift from the victim to the killer. Months earlier, Felix had given Gail a present, a small, silver .38 caliber Derringer pistol. He gave it to her for protection in the gritty New York City of the 80s. That morning, Gail Collins retrieved the gun from their bedroom. She didn't fire a warning shot. She didn't threaten him. She aimed the tiny, elegant Derringer at her husband's neck and pulled the trigger. The bullet severed his carotid artery. Felix Pappalardi, the man who helped define the sound of an era, collapsed and died in his own bedroom. He was 43 years old. The thunder of rock was silenced by a single silver pistol. Gail's reaction was not that of a grieving widow, but of a calculated survivor. She called the police, but her story was already crafted. She claimed it was a tragic accident, that Felix was teaching her how to use the gun when it accidentally went off. But the evidence told a different story. The angle of the shot, the simmering tension, the fact that Felix was about to leave her. All of it pointed to a cold, premeditated execution born of jealous rage. She was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The music world was stunned. The woman who wrote the lyrics to Strange Brew had brewed a lethal potion of her own. The trial was a New York sensation. Prosecutors painted her as a jealous, controlling woman who would rather see her husband dead than with someone else. But the jury bought her story of an accident. In a verdict that shocked the industry and enraged Felix's fans, she was acquitted of murder. Instead, she was found guilty of the much lesser charge of criminally negligent homicide. It was a slap on the wrist for taking the life of a legend. This verdict remains one of the most controversial in rock history. So I ask you, do you believe her accident defense? Or was this a clear case of a clever woman using the legal system to get away with murder? The aftermath was bizarre. Gail served barely 2 years in prison. She vanished, moving to Mexico to live a reclusive life under a cloud of suspicion, and was found dead in 2013, taking the full truth of that morning to her grave. Felix Pappalardi's legacy lives on in the thunderous riffs of classic rock. But his life serves as a grim warning. Sometimes the creative partnership that builds you up is the very one that tears you down. And the gift you give for protection can become the instrument of your execution. If this story of rock and roll betrayal kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit the like button to support the channel. Share this video with every classic rock fan you know. And make sure you are subscribed for Part 4, where we will uncover the heartbreaking story of the Queen of Tejano and the woman she called Mom. Felix Pappalardi's legacy lives on in the thunderous riffs of classic rock. But his life serves as a grim warning. Sometimes the creative partnership that builds you up is the very one that tears you down. And the gift you give for protection can become the instrument of your execution. If this story of rock and roll betrayal kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit the like button to support the channel. Share this video with every classic rock fan you know. And make sure you are subscribed for Part 4, where we will uncover the heartbreaking story of the Queen of Tejano and the woman she called Mom. Number 4. Selena. She wasn't just a singer. She was a celestial event. A supernova of talent, charisma, and pure joy who was on the absolute precipice of global domination. Selena Quintanilla Perez was the Queen of Tejano, a barrier-breaking icon with a smile that could disarm the world. She was the Mexican Madonna, days away from releasing her historic English crossover album, Dreaming of You, destined to crown her the biggest star in music. But the very moment her star burned brightest, it was violently extinguished. Not by a stranger, not by a rival, but by the one woman whose sole job was to protect her. A woman who had cunningly woven herself into the singer's heart until she was treated not as an employee, but as family. This is the ultimate story of betrayal. A murder fueled by greed, obsession, and a desperate need to control a star who is outgrowing her cage. The villain of this tragedy is Yolanda Saldivar. To understand the depth of this betrayal, you must understand the deception. Yolanda started as a fan, a nurse who pestered Selena's father, Abraham, to let her start a fan club. Once that door cracked open, she forced her way in and never left. She became the president of the fan club, then a confidant, then the manager of Selena's boutiques. She was so deeply embedded that Selena, with her famously trusting heart, lovingly called her mom. She held the keys to the business. She had access to the bank accounts. She held the complete trust of a young superstar who believed everyone around her was good. But behind the mask of the devoted mother figure was a thief and a pathological liar. By March 1995, the facade was crumbling. Fans complained they'd paid for merchandise never received. Money was vanishing from the boutiques. Abraham, a shrewd businessman always wary of outsiders, investigated and found evidence of systematic embezzlement. Yolanda was stealing from the family that had embraced her as their own. On March 9th, the family confronted her. Abraham fired her on the spot, demanding she return the financial records she had stolen. A normal person would have slunk away in shame. But Yolanda Saldivar was not normal. She was obsessively attached. Her entire identity was being Selena's favorite. Without Selena, she was nobody. She began a manipulative game, holding the documents hostage, claiming she had been raped in Mexico to gain sympathy, doing anything to keep her hooks in Selena's world. On the morning of March 31st, 1995, Selena made a fatal mistake born from her kind nature. She agreed to meet Yolanda alone at a Corpus Christi Days Inn motel to retrieve the missing papers. She believed she could reason with the woman she called Mom. In room 158, the confrontation turned deadly. Selena demanded the documents. Yolanda stalled, spinning more lies. When Selena finally saw the truth and turned to walk away, the woman she called Mom pulled out a .38 caliber Taurus revolver. There was no hesitation. She fired a single, expanding hollow-point bullet into Selena's back. The bullet severed a critical artery. It was a devastating, unsurvivable wound. But Selena, fueled by adrenaline and a fierce will to live, didn't collapse. She ran. She ran from that room, clutching her chest, leaving a trail of blood for 390 feet, all the way to the motel lobby. Yolanda didn't call for help. She didn't try to save her. She chased the dying star, screaming profanities at her. Selena collapsed in the lobby, and with her final, fading breath, she did the one thing that ensured her killer would face justice. She named her. She told the hotel clerk, Yolanda Saldivar, room 158. While doctors fought in vain to save the 23-year-old icon, a grotesque standoff unfolded outside. Yolanda barricaded herself in her truck with a gun to her own head, holding police at bay for nearly 10 hours in a final, narcissistic play for attention. But the world wasn't watching her. Millions were mourning the loss of a generational talent. It wasn't a celebrity death. It felt like a death in the family for an entire culture. The trial was swift. The defense's accident story was obliterated by the evidence and Selena's dying declaration. The jury took less than 3 hours to find Yolanda Saldivar guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison, eligible for parole after 30 years. And that date is racing toward us. In March 2025, the woman who killed Selena will stand before a parole board and ask for her freedom. This forces upon us the most difficult question of our entire series. Do you believe that someone who steals a life as bright, as promising, as full of love as Selena's can ever truly repay their debt to society? Should Yolanda Saldivar be released? Or does the magnitude of her betrayal demand she die behind bars? Tell me your final verdict in the comments below. Yolanda remains in a Texas prison, largely in solitary confinement for her own protection, because the world's hatred for her has not faded. Selena's legacy, however, has only grown brighter. Her music still fills dance floors, her style is still iconic, but her story is forever marked by a void, a haunting question of what could have been, stolen by the woman she called Mom. If this tragic story of the Queen of Tejano moved you, please hit the like button. Share this with everyone who remembers her light. And make sure you are subscribed for Part 5, where we will expose the most shattering story yet. A child star, the voice of your childhood, murdered by her own father. Number 5. Judith Barsi. This story is the most shattering on our list. It's not about a rock star or a soul legend. It's about the silencing of a tiny, angelic voice that defined the innocence of an entire generation. If you grew up in the 1980s, you know her. She was the sweet, optimistic soul behind Ducky and the Land Before Time. Her famous line, "Yep, yep, yep," echoing in our memories. She was the singing voice of Amory in All Dogs Go to Heaven, a performance so pure it could mend a broken heart. Judith Barsi was a child prodigy, a tiny, freckle-faced girl earning $100,000 a year before she even hit puberty, single-handedly lifting her family out of poverty. But behind a microphone and the bright studio lights, Judith was living a domestic hell darker than any animated nightmare. This is the story of a father whose consuming jealousy and paranoia transformed him into the executioner of his own miracle. We are exposing the grim reality that hides behind the curtain of child fame. The monster in this story has a name, Joseph Barsi. Judith's father, a Hungarian immigrant plumber who carried a darkness no ocean could leave behind. He was an alcoholic, a paranoid tyrant who ruled his household with terror. As Judith's fame and paychecks grew, so did Joseph's insanity. He wasn't a proud father. He was a threatened one. He saw his daughter's success not as a blessing, but as a challenge to his control. He became obsessed with the idea that his wife, Maria, and Judith were going to leave him, take the money, and abandon him. To stop this, he unleashed a reign of psychological and physical torture. He would drag Judith out of bed in the middle of the night and force her to memorize his rules. In an act of unspeakable cruelty, he once held a kitchen knife to the 10-year-old's throat and hissed, "If you decide not to come back, I will cut your throat." This was not an empty threat. It was the air she breathed. The stress was so immense, so unbearable, that this little girl began to physically manifest her trauma. She pulled out her own eyelashes. She plucked the whiskers from her pet cats. These were the silent, desperate screams for help that the adults around her failed to hear. The true tragedy of Judith Barsi is that the system built to protect her failed spectacularly. Her mother, Maria, did try to save her. She went to Child Protective Services. She showed them the signs. She told them about the threats. But the investigation was botched. Joseph was charming when he needed to be. The case was closed, with a recommendation for Maria to simply leave him. But leaving a violent, paranoid abuser is the most dangerous step a victim can take. Maria was terrified he would hunt them down and kill them, a threat he made constantly. She began secretly renting an apartment, slowly moving their belongings, planning an escape she prayed would save her daughter's life. But she moved too slowly. Joseph felt his control slipping. On the morning of July 25, 1988, the tension in the Barsi home in West Hills finally snapped. Judith was scheduled for an audition for a new Hanna-Barbera show, another step in a career that was only just beginning. She never made it. That night, while Judith slept in her bed, the same bed where she surely dreamed of the cartoon world she brought to life, Joseph Barsi walked into her room. He placed a .32 caliber pistol against his daughter's head, and he pulled the trigger. He murdered his 10-year-old child in her sleep. The gunshot alerted Maria, who ran down the hall. Joseph met her and shot her, too. For 2 days, the monster lived in the house with the bodies of his wife and daughter. Then, he doused them in gasoline, set the house on fire, and went into the garage, turning the gun on himself. Police found the charred remains of a family, a gruesome end to a life that had brought so much joy to millions. The entertainment world was devastated. The director of The Land Before Time said Judith was Ducky. Her personality was the heart of the film. The song Love Survives and All Dogs Go to Heaven was dedicated to her memory, a haunting tribute to the little girl who never got to hear the final product of her own genius. This case forces us to look at the utter failure of every safety net. It leaves us with a furious, unanswerable question. Who do we hold responsible? Do you blame the mother for not leaving sooner? Or do you blame the Child Protective Services system that saw the abuse, investigated, and walked away? I want to know who you hold accountable for this catastrophic failure in the comments below. Judith Barcy is buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park, a permanent echo of the character she immortalized. She is a symbol of stolen potential, a reminder that the voices that sing the sweetest songs are sometimes crying for help in a language the world refuses to understand. Her father didn't just kill a child, he killed a future. And make sure you're subscribed for part 6, where we investigate a soul legend, the human timekeeper betrayed by a hired gun in his own home. Number 6, Al Jackson Jr. They called him the human timekeeper. If you've ever tapped your foot to a soul record from the 60s or 70s, you were moving to the beat of this man's hands. He was the drummer for Booker T and the MGs, the legendary house band for Stax Records. He was the rhythmic backbone of Otis Redding, Wilson Pickett, and Sam and Dave. He didn't just play the drums. He was the Memphis sound, a groove so deep, so precise, it changed music forever. He was a wealthy, respected legend who had climbed to the very top. But while he was keeping perfect time on stage, his own time on earth was running out, ticking down to a violent explosion within the walls of his own home. This is the story of a toxic marriage that spiraled into a murder mystery, a case that remains one of the darkest, most suspicious chapters in music history. The tragedy of Al Jackson Jr. is centered on a volatile and dangerous relationship, his marriage to Barbara Jackson. To the outside world, they were a glamorous, successful couple living the high life in Memphis. But behind closed doors, their marriage was a war zone, fueled by control and jealousy. By 1975, the human timekeeper was planning his escape. He was going to file for divorce, ready to leave the toxicity behind and start a new chapter. But in the world of domestic violence, trying to leave is the most dangerous move of all. The warning signs weren't subtle. There were gunshots. Just 3 months before his death, a violent fight erupted. Barbara Jackson pulled out a gun and shot her husband in the chest. It was a life-threatening injury. Al survive. But in a decision that baffles everyone today, he chose not to press charges. Maybe he wanted to avoid scandal. Maybe he thought he could handle it. He told friends he was going to leave her, but he stayed in the house, a decision that would seal his fate. On the night of October 1st, 1975, Al Jackson Jr. returned to his Memphis home after watching the Ollie Frazier Thrilla in Manila fight. He walked through his front door, expecting to find his wife. He did, but she wasn't alone. According to Barbara's story, she ran to him, screaming that there were intruders. Moments later, Al was confronted by men with guns. But this was no ordinary robbery. The intruders' behavior was cold, calculated, and deeply personal. They beat him. They taunted him. They forced him to the floor. And then they executed him. They shot the legendary drummer not once, but 5 times in the back. It was a cowardly, brutal end for a man who gave the world so much joy. The intruders fled, leaving Barbara physically unharmed but tied up, a detail the Memphis police would scrutinize with intense suspicion. When police arrived, the scene felt wrong. It looked staged. Nothing of great value was taken. The violence was too focused, too personal. This didn't look like a robbery. It looked like a hit. The investigation immediately turned to the grieving widow, the same woman who had put a bullet in AL's chest just 90 days earlier. The theory was chillingly simple. Barbara knew Al was about to divorce her and take his fortune with him. So she decided if she couldn't have him, no one would. Did she hire these men to finish the job she started in July? The aftermath was a legal nightmare. A suspect, Mayo Hampton, an acquaintance of Barbara, was identified. But the justice system failed Al Jackson Jr. completely. There was never enough concrete evidence to prove a murder-for-hire plot in a court of law. The case against the intruders fell apart. The murder of the human timekeeper was officially labeled unsolved. But in the court of public opinion and within the heart of the music community, the verdict has long been in. Al Jackson Jr. wasn't killed by a random stranger. He was killed by the toxic environment of his own home. Barbara lived the rest of her life under a cloud of suspicion, dying in 1998, taking her secrets to the grave. AL's music is immortal. Every time you hear Green Onions or Sitting on the Dock of the Bay, you are hearing his ghost. But his life is a grim warning about the dangers we ignore in our own homes. This case leaves us with a haunting, unresolved question. Do you believe it was a random home invasion? Or do the previous shooting and the timing of the divorce point to a cold-blooded setup by his wife? I want to know your theory on this unsolved mystery in the comments below. If this tragic story of the man who kept the beat for the world moved you, hit the like button to honor his memory. Share this video so the truth is not forgotten. And make sure you're subscribed for part 7, where we investigate a reggae revolutionary murdered by a man he treated like a brother. Number 7. Peter Tosh. He was the stepping razor, the militant heart of reggae music. The only man on earth who could stand toe-to-toe with Bob Marley and never back down. A founding member of the Wailers, Peter Tosh was a lyrical revolutionary. He preached equal rights and justice with a fire that governments feared. He championed the legalization of marijuana long before it was a global movement. He was a towering figure, a martial arts expert who carried himself with the swagger of a man who feared no system, no politician, no Babylon. But while he spent his life fighting external oppression, the threat that would finally silence his voice didn't come from a politician or a police badge. It came from a man he had welcomed into his own home, a man he had fed, clothed, and treated like a brother. This is the devastating story of a Good Samaritan act that turned into a massacre. A chilling lesson that sometimes the hand you hold out to help someone is the same hand that will eventually pull the trigger. To understand the murder of Peter Tosh, you must understand his philosophy. He believed in the brotherhood of man, especially the downtrodden and poor of Jamaica. He lived in a fortress-like home in Barbican, Kingston, but his heart remained open to the streets. Enter Dennis Lepo Laban. Lepo was not a musician. He was a ghetto hustler, a man down on his luck who had just been released from prison. He had nowhere to go. Peter Tosh, seeing a brother in need, took him in. This was his fatal mistake. Tosh gave him money. He gave him food. He gave him access to his inner circle. He gave him trust. Friends warned Tosh about Lepo, sensing a deep darkness in the man. But Tosh waved them off, believing his kindness would be repaid with loyalty. It was a catastrophic miscalculation of human nature. Lepo didn't see a mentor. He saw a bank account. He saw a man living in luxury while he struggled. That gratitude slowly curdled into a toxic, murderous envy. On the night of September 11th, 1987, Peter Tosh was relaxing at his home with his common-law wife, Marlene Brown, and several friends, including DJ Jeff "Free" I. Dixon. The peace was shattered when 3 armed men stormed through the gate. Leading them was Dennis Lepo Laban. He wasn't there to say thank you. He was there to collect. The men burst into the living room, guns drawn, and immediately demanded money. They believed that because Tosh had just returned from America, he must be hiding large amounts of U.S. cash. Tosh, calm and defiant to the end, told them the truth. He had no significant money in the house. His finances were handled by banks and accountants. But Lepo, blinded by greed and humiliated by his own dependence, didn't believe him. The home invasion turned into a torture session. For hours, the gunmen pistol-whipped Peter Tosh. They beat the reggae legend mercilessly in his own living room, demanding the dollars he insisted weren't there. Tosh, as tough as the revolutionary he was, refused to break. Lepo, realizing he wasn't getting the payday he wanted, decided to exact a different kind of payment. In a final act of ultimate betrayal, He put the gun to the head of the man who had saved his life. He didn't just shoot Peter Tosh. He executed him. 2 bullets to the head. The gunman then opened fire on the room in a chaotic spray of bullets. DJ Free, I was killed instantly. Marlene Brown was shot in the head, but miraculously survived by playing dead. Several others were wounded. It was a bloodbath, a senseless slaughter of a musical prophet for money that was never there. When the gunmen fled, they left behind a scene of carnage that shocked the world. The stepping razor was dead at 42. The investigation was chaotic, but Marlene Brown's testimony was the key. She identified Lepo. She knew him. She had fed him. She saw him pull the trigger. Dennis Lepo Laban was arrested and charged with murder. At trial, he claimed innocence, but the eyewitness accounts were damning. He was found guilty and sentenced to death, a sentence later commuted to life imprisonment. He remains in a Jamaican prison to this day, a ghost of the past. The murder of Peter Tosh remains a heavy scar on the soul of reggae music. It wasn't a political hit. It was personal. It was a betrayal of the highest order. This forces us to confront a dangerous reality of human nature. Do you believe Peter Tosh's generosity was his fatal flaw? Or was Lepo a sociopath who would have betrayed anyone who showed him kindness? Where do we draw the line between compassion and self-preservation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If this harrowing story of the silencing of a revolutionary moved you, please hit the like button to keep his message alive. Share this video with everyone who believes in equal rights and justice. And make sure you are subscribed for Part 8, where we uncover the mysterious drowning of a Rolling Stones founder. Was it an accident or a murder covered up for decades? Number 8. Brian Jones. We've seen parents kill children and wives kill husbands. Now we enter the murky world of rock and roll royalty, where family extends to the entourage, the handlers, the people paid to live inside the mansion. This is the story of the original golden god of the British invasion, a man whose death was ruled an accident for decades, but whose final moments whisper a much darker truth of domestic betrayal. He was the founder of the Rolling Stones, the multi-instrumentalist genius who gave the band its name, its sound, and its dangerous, androgynous edge. Brian Jones was the blonde-haired, fashion-obsessed architect of cool. But by 1969, he was a fallen angel. Kicked out of the band he created, isolated in a country estate, and living with a man who was supposed to be fixing his house, but was instead plotting his demise. To understand the tragedy of Brian Jones, you must step into his final days at Cochford Farm. This was the former home of A. Milne, the creator of Winnie the Pooh, a fairy tale setting for a rock star's exile. But the atmosphere was pure poison. Brian, drowning in drug addiction and heartbreak after being fired from the Stones, had surrounded himself with a chaotic entourage. The most prominent was Frank Thorogood, a builder hired to renovate the estate. But Thorogood had become something more, a live-in companion, a minder, and a man simmering with a deep, violent resentment. Brian was the wealthy, erratic rock star. Thorogood was the rough, working-class builder who felt underpaid and disrespected. The tension was a ticking time bomb, fueled by alcohol and bitter arguments over money. Brian treated Thorogood poorly, and Thorogood's temper was a known danger. He wasn't just an employee. He was a part of the toxic household Brian called his family, and that trust would be a death sentence. On the night of July 2nd, 1969, a heat wave choked England. Brian Jones decided to take a midnight swim in his pool. He was joined by Thorogood and a few others. The group had been drinking, but witnesses said Brian was coherent, even happy, talking about his future. What happened next is a fog of conflicting stories and police incompetence. But the murder theory is terrifyingly simple. It centers on a violent argument over money. Thorogood was demanding payment he felt he was owed. Brian refused. The other guests went inside, leaving the rock star and the builder alone in the dark water. Minutes later, Thorogood stumbled into the house, shaking and wet, muttering, "Something's happened to Brian." When they rushed back out, the founder of the Rolling Stones was motionless at the bottom of the pool. He was pulled out, but it was too late. The coroner ruled it death by misadventure, blaming alcohol and drugs. A convenient verdict that swept a rock star's messy death under the rug. But the story refused to die. For decades, the whispers grew. The accident theory ignored crucial facts. Brian Jones was a strong swimmer. It ignored the palpable tension in the house. It ignored Thorogood's vicious temper. The truth began to leak out years later, from the killer's own deathbed. In 1993, as Frank Thorogood lay dying, he gave a shocking confession to Tom Keelock, the Stones road manager who was there that night. His final words? "It was me that did Brian. I just finally snapped." The confession painted a picture of a fight in the pool, a moment where the builder, consumed by rage and envy, held the rock star's head underwater until his struggles ceased. It wasn't a misadventure. It was a drowning. A murder committed by a man who ate Brian's food, lived in his house, and took his money. The police files were re-examined in 2009, but with the prime suspect long dead, no charges were ever brought. This case remains one of rock's darkest open secrets. It changes everything we know about the 27 Club. Brian Jones didn't just burn out. He was murdered by a member of his own household. This leaves us with a chilling question that haunts music history. Do you believe the police covered up the murder to avoid a scandal? Or was Thorogood's deathbed confession the final truth? Was Brian Jones the first victim of a domestic murder that history tried to erase? Give me your verdict in the comments. And make sure you're subscribed for Part 9, where we expose a rap legend betrayed and executed by his own crew over a piece of candy. Number 9. Slim Duncan. We have witnessed betrayals by blood relatives and spouses. But in the world of hip-hop, the word family extends to the crew. The brothers forged not by birth, but by the struggle to make it out of the streets. This is the story of a rising giant, the heartbeat of one of hip-hop's most influential collectives. A man on the cusp of global fame, silenced by a member of his own musical brotherhood over a dispute so petty, it exposes the terrifying fragility of life in the fast lane. His government name was Mario Hamilton, but the streets knew him as Slim Duncan. The charismatic 6 feet, 8 inches Titan who stood beside Waka Flocka Flame and Gucci Mane, a central pillar of the Brick Squad Monopoly empire. He was a legend in Atlanta, a mentor, a man whose energy was electric. But on a cold December night, the recording studio, a sanctuary for art, became a slaughterhouse, proving that envy and ego can turn a brother into an executioner in the blink of an eye. The tragedy of Slim Duncan is a brutal lesson in how fast a family atmosphere can turn fatal. Brick Squad wasn't just a label, it was a fraternity. They lived together, bled together. Slim Duncan was the glue. On December 16, 2011, Slim was at an Atlanta studio preparing to shoot a music video for his friend Gucci Mane. The vibe was supposed to be celebratory, a family gathering to create. In the crowd was Vincent Hardiman, known as Young Vito. Vito was not a stranger. He was an affiliate, a rapper from the same circles. He was supposed to be a brother. But beneath the surface, a storm of clashing egos was brewing, waiting for a spark. That spark didn't come from a contract dispute or a woman. It came from something unbelievably small. In a cramped studio waiting room, a disagreement erupted between Slim Duncan and Young Vito. Witnesses said it started over a game of dice, but the argument escalated over something even more absurd. A Jolly Rancher. A piece of candy. It sounds like a sick joke. Impossible that a life could be extinguished over something so trivial. But in an environment supercharged with pride and the street code to never back down, a small slight becomes a lethal insult. Slim reportedly grabbed a piece of candy from Vito's stash. Vito took it as a sign of disrespect. Words were exchanged. The brotherhood evaporated in an instant, replaced by the cold, hard code of the streets. The argument turned physical. Slim, a massive and powerful man, reportedly got the better of the fight. In any other world, this would have ended with bruised egos and a handshake later. But young Vito wasn't living in that world. He felt disrespected, humiliated in front of the family. He left the room, but he didn't leave the building. He went to his car, or maybe a bag, and retrieved a handgun. When young Vito returned to the studio, He wasn't looking for an apology. He was looking for revenge. He walked up to Slim Duncan, the man he had collaborated with, the man he had called a brother, and he fired. A single shot to the chest. The bullet tore through his lung and heart. The giant fell. The studio, packed with dozens of people, erupted into chaos. Young Vito, the brother, fled the scene, leaving Slim bleeding out on the floor. Slim was rushed to Grady Memorial Hospital, but was pronounced dead on arrival. He was 24 years old. His career was just exploding. Waka Flocka Flame, his best friend, was shattered, calling Slim his blood brother and falling into a depression that nearly ended his own career. The betrayal cut deep into the heart of Atlanta. It wasn't a rival gang. It was someone from inside the circle, someone who shared the same dreams. The manhunt for young Vito lasted 10 days. He eventually turned himself in, claiming self-defense, saying he feared for his life because of Slim's size. But the jury saw through it. They saw a man who escalated a fist fight into a murder because his ego was bruised. In a verdict that frustrated the hip-hop community, Vito was acquitted of murder but found guilty of aggravated assault and firearm possession. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. He has since been released, but the shadow of that night remains. Slim Duncan's death marked the end of an era for Brick Squad, a grim warning that in this industry, the people you hustle with can be the same people who hurt you. This case forces us to ask a terrifying question about violence and pride. Do you believe the code of the streets makes tragedies like this inevitable? Or was young Vito a uniquely dangerous individual who would have snapped at anyone? Was this self-defense or a fragile ego with a gun? I need to know your take in the comments. And make sure you are subscribed for Part 10, our final chapter, where we uncover the most senseless murder of all, a soul legend shot dead by his own stepson over the volume of a stereo. Number 10. William W.G. Howard. We have journeyed through a landscape of horror. We've seen mothers kill sons, wives kill husbands, and fathers slaughter daughters. Motives of greed, jealousy, and insanity. But we end our investigation with a case that is perhaps the most terrifying of all. Not because of a grand conspiracy, but because of its sheer, breathtaking pettiness. This is the story of a soul legend. A man whose voice defined the heartbreak and groove of the 1970s. A man who sang about rain and pain, only to have his life ended in his own living room over a dispute so trivial it exposes the fragile, violent thread holding some families together. He was the lead voice of the Dramatics, the thunder behind the timeless classic In the Rain. His name was William W.G. Howard, a titan of R&B who had toured the world, sold millions, and earned his place in music history. But fame, talent, and legacy offered no protection against the volatile rage of a family member who decided that a moment of annoyance was worth more than a legend's life. This is our final curtain call. If you have followed us through this dark exploration of betrayal, subscribe to this channel right now. And if you appreciate the depth of this series, hit the like button as we conclude this investigation. The story takes us to Detroit, Michigan, the heartbeat of soul music. By the year 2000, W.G. Howard was 49 years old, no longer in the bright lights of the 70s, but still a working legend, revered by fans and living a quiet life. He shared his home with his wife, Bryson, and her 19-year-old son, Kojo Walker. This was not a stranger. This was his stepson, a young man he had helped raise, a member of the family unit. But beneath the surface, the household simmered with a tension all too common in blended families, a clash of generations, of authority, of respect. W.G. was the man of the house, a man used to commanding stages, who expected a certain level of order. Kojo was a teenager, wrestling with the restlessness of youth. But no one, absolutely no one, could have predicted that this typical domestic friction would explode into a homicide over something as insignificant as the volume dial on a stereo. On the afternoon of February 22, 2000, the house was calm. Until it wasn't. W.G. Howard was at home, trying to relax. In another room, his stepson Kojo was playing music. The bass was thumping. The volume was loud. Too loud. W.G., the man with the golden voice, asked for some peace and quiet. He asked Kojo to turn it down. It was a request made in millions of homes every single day, a standard parent-teenager interaction. But on this day, in this house, the request was met not with compliance, but with a sudden, volcanic rage. Kojo Walker refused. Words were exchanged. The volume didn't go down. The temperature in the room skyrocketed. The argument escalated from a dispute about noise to a battle about respect, about territory, about who was really in charge. And then, the unthinkable happened. The 19-year-old stepson didn't just storm out. He didn't just slam a door. He reached for a weapon. In a split second of madness that would destroy 2 lives and shatter a musical legacy, Kojo Walker pulled out a gun. He didn't aim at a stranger. He aimed at the man who put a roof over his head, the man who had shared his home and his life. He fired. A single gunshot ripped through the house. The bullet struck William Weegee Howard in the chest, the soul legend. The man who had sung so beautifully about the pain of heartbreak fell to the floor of his own home, mortally wounded by his own stepson. The music stopped forever. He was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was done. The voice of the dramatics was silenced, pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The motive? A stereo, a life of artistry, a career of brilliance, erased because a teenager didn't want to turn the volume down. The aftermath was a wave of shock and grief in the Detroit music community. The dramatics were icons. To lose Weegee in such a senseless, domestic way was a tragedy that defied understanding. Kojo Walker was arrested and charged with murder. The trial was an open-and-shut case, a tragedy of impulse. He was found guilty of second-degree murder and felony firearm possession. The judge sentenced him to 25 to 50 years in prison. He threw away his own life, his freedom, and his future, all for a moment of stubborn, violent pride. This case is the ultimate grim punctuation mark on our series. It proves that the most dangerous place for a legend isn't always a dark alley or a drug den. Sometimes it's the living room. It proves that the people we let into our hearts and homes hold the power to destroy us in ways no stranger ever could. This concludes our investigation into the 10 music legends murdered by their own families. This series has shown us that behind the glamour and the gold records, these icons were human beings, vulnerable to the same toxic dynamics and sudden violence as anyone else. One final question for you. Do you think fame makes these domestic tragedies more likely, or does it just make them more public? I want to read your final thoughts in the comments below. If this journey into the dark side of music history has impacted you, please hit the like button. Share this video with every music fan you know,